Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner. I am the primary host of the Dear Katie podcast, and we are so delighted to have you take this journey with us on our weekly podcast episodes. I just want to remind everyone to do great self-care. Thriving is part of the purpose of this podcast, and we definitely want you to take a break at any time. Warm bath, fresh air, walk a dog, have a bite of chocolate, whatever you need to do good care for yourself. Just as a reintroduction, if you're not familiar with me, I am the woman who was on the cover of Time magazine at age 18 as the first in history to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And HBO made a film about me, and I went on to become the executive director of the Take Back the Night Foundation. We are the oldest, largest global movement on sexual violence in all forms for all people in the world. So we encourage you to visit our website for lots more information. So I'm going to turn it over to our hosts and our guests for today. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner. And as all of you know, I think from my bio, I've been at this a little while since I was age 18 on the cover of Time magazine. Really trying to change the world in every way, shape, and form around policy, protocols, standards of care, oversight through Title IX, writing federal laws, like the whole 9 yards. And I never give up very easily. So luckily, I'm still at this. And now we have the Dear Katie podcast. So our listeners likely know all the wonderful ways to do self-care as we continue on the journey. Each and every guest will offer something new and some new, I think, hopefully perspective on both what this issue involves and how we might navigate our own healing journeys as survivors or support those who are doing that alongside us. Just recall that you can push pause and take a break at any time. Trigger warning always. And, maybe I don't like triggers. Someone was saying the other day, triggers out. And now trigger is triggering. So perhaps we just say self-care is always in favor. And chocolate, cartwheels, fresh air, hot air balloons, always a good way to take a break if you need something other than listening to our narrative today. My amazing guest is Amanda Eisenberg, and Amanda has done so many things and is really not that old, I like to say. So let me tell you about Amanda. Amanda is a writer and adjunct professor based in Manhattan. She's the person her friends call for shoe recommendations or the best new place to eat. Amanda is an award-winning journalist whose writing has been featured in Politico, In Style, and The Washington Post, among others. She's passionate about women's health and has written extensively on healthcare access and sexual misconduct. Amanda grew up in Bergen County, New Jersey, and is a proud graduate of the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism. She's also an avid sports fan and rides hard for her favorite, albeit cursed team, the New York Jets. People Are Talking is her debut novel. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I start with, I actually know where Bergen County is because that is where my parents grew up. So I do know that well. And they have a reservoir around there and a couple Catholic schools. So did you go to one of the Catholic ones or one of the public ones?
I went to New Jersey's public schools. I loved growing up in New Jersey. My parents were both New Yorkers. And so I always wanted to live in New York City, and I felt very disgruntled by the fact that I was stuck in the suburbs, But like you mentioned,
it's a pretty fast train ride across the river there. So you can get into the city quickly.
That's very true. And there's beautiful parks. And you mentioned taking a walk for your mental health. I love taking walks around the city. I love taking walks around New Jersey. It is a great way for some stress relief. So great recommendation.
Yeah, it's kind of, well, I think sometimes we, you either want to live straight in the middle of the hustle bustle, or if you live outside, you can go in and you can leave it all behind when you need to.
So true.
But so then you go to college. You went to Mount, there's so many St. Mary's. Which one is it? The Mount St. Mary's.
I went to the University of Maryland. St. Mary's, I think Yeah, I think there is one in Maryland. But yeah, I went to the University of Maryland, and it's a big rah-rah
Oh yeah,
college town,
massive.
big university, and has a big Greek life. Um, and so when I was in college, I really got a taste of kind of everything that the university offered. They had an amazing journalism school. I was a tour guide.
Oh,
So I would take, it was so fun. I would take, prospective students around campus. And it was so interesting because at Maryland, I think most universities have this. They have like a blue light system. And so the idea is if you're walking home by yourself at night or, you could be with friends, and if anything is of alarm, you can click this button and, campus police will show up. And it was interesting because the reason why those exist are because of sexual assaults on college campuses, and being able to kind of talk about that with students and their parents, but then also kind of trying not to scare them. It's like how much
Good
information.
question, Amanda. Like
Yeah,
I've done a lot of senior preparation talks, and I always make half a joke that the blue light buttons are half for calling the police, but also calling the pizza guy. Like, I don't know how many oftentimes, and then I always then go on to say, like, how does that exactly work? The scary boogeyman is after you, so you get your butt to the blue light, and then what? You turn around and say, he's coming, they're coming for you. Or do you
I
keep
know.
running, right? So I always think, like, plus we're only talking about 16% of sexual assaults. So blue lights are interesting. I don't know if they give a false sense of security, but maybe you have better data than I on how often they're used.
That's a great question. I don't know. I wonder if it's one of those things where, its presence is supposed to be a deterrent. I've never personally used one of the blue lights. I don't know anyone who did on campus, but I do know that that was a talking point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a faux sense of safety sometimes. So I'm not sure, but you know. So anyway, you're at Maryland, and then what happens next?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Maryland knowing I wanted to be a journalist. I was able to enroll directly into their journalism program. A lot of schools, they make you wait 2 years to do kind of your gen eds, and then you start your journalism classes. What I loved about my time at Maryland was day one on campus. You can get involved taking journalism classes, writing at your school newspaper. I was the editor-in-chief of the campus magazine. And so many of my friends now, and, it's so nice of you to say I'm young. My college students told me I'm so vivacious for somebody who's 30. So it's, it comes for you fast. But some of my friends now, like I'm still really close friends with the people in my journalism program. And I think journalism in particular, kind of brings in a certain type of personality. My friends are just passionate people. They care deeply about other people's stories. They find empathy in so many things. They always can find something interesting in a person. And so I think there's like a certain personality type that definitely gravitates toward journalism. And I think there's also a specific type that gravitates toward covering hard things and being able to kind of look at horrible things that have happened to people in the world and be with them on their worst day. As a journalist, I have covered like house fires that killed, a set of grandparents. And I was talking to like the 9-year-old kids, like the grandkids. And they're sitting and talking to a journalist. And so being able to kind of be a solid presence where you're like, okay, I'm here because I want to report on the news and I want to report on what's going on in people's lives and finding empathy, while also trying to kind of have that remove of being like, well, I'm not part of the story. I'm here to kind of tell somebody else's story and make sure I'm getting all the facts and doing the best job possible to kind of complete that picture. Mm. And so I really loved my time at school and being able to tell those stories. And, I was interning at the Jersey Journal, which was a local newspaper that unfortunately is shutting down this year due to like financial reasons. I interned at Hearst in New York City, which does a lot of like the women's magazines. I was able to kind of try every single type of beat. I covered business. I covered like hard news, local news, politics. And I think what's great about journalism is it lets people really kind of take a taste of everything in the world and exposes people to all different kinds of people. And so that was like why I loved talking. I love journalism. I love being able to ask questions and question powerful people. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I gravitated toward the news.
Yeah, well, Amanda, I'm thinking about one thing though that you mentioned, which is, you want to bring empathy, but still this matter of fact, kind of hard core information. How do you, as a journalist, separate yourself from reporting? I mean, we're having so many cases in the news, and some of them, I mean, global ones are just disgusting around sexual misconduct with, we've had women being burned, women being killed. There's so much tragedy around sexual violence. And, I don't know if we haven't talked about survivorship yet for yourself, but I think sometimes it's really hard to, find that steely self when you might be internally feeling so much about a particular topic personally, or when, like, I can even imagine if someone's doubting or expressing doubts that you need to report out about the veracity of someone's story, it can maybe feel like, oh my gosh, how many people are also doubting my story? And maybe there's a way to separate the two.
No, that's such a good question. And I've covered sexual assault and sexual misconduct, I would say, pretty extensively in my career. So, for example, Marissa Hochstether, she was the first survivor to come forward about her OBGYN sexually assaulting her while she was pregnant. Mm-hmm. And that OBGYN has since been charged. He allegedly abused more than 200 girls and women.
Yeah.
And so when I first met her, she was petitioning city council to update a law so she would take this doctor's name off her children's birth certificates. So her kids were like, going into kindergarten or going to camp. And every time she had to give like the administrators their birth certificates, it had the doctor's name on it. So it was really triggering for her. And so I had just met with her. She was kind of telling me a little bit about her story. And it started out as a local news story. And then she wound up being really bolstered by the press coverage, by being able to talk publicly about her experience, that she then became, like the first woman to come forward. There was a lawsuit. And because of her bravery, other women stepped forward, including Evelyn Yang, who is the wife of Andrew Yang, who ran for mayor of New York City in 2021.
Hi, this is Katie Koestner, and I wanted to remind all of our listeners about the free National Sexual Assault Legal Hotline. We at Take Back the Night have assembled an incredible team of attorneys, trauma-informed, who truly believe survivors and want to support their journeys in healing and finding justice. The Get Justice Hotline is 567-SHATTER, or feel free to fill out a form on the Take Back the Night website, share your story, let the attorneys know what's going on, and they will get back to you as soon as possible with all of your legal options. That is a service we are delighted to provide through Take Back the Night.
And so, being able to speak with those women and talk to them about their experience, I think it's really important as a reporter to be empathetic to everyone you talk to, even somebody who is the, accused. Mm-hmm. My feeling is that everyone deserves dignity and the respect of being able to cover a story as accurately as possible. And obviously, before we started recording, you had mentioned the Duke lacrosse case. That is like I feel like the 1 in a billion story where a rape survivor said, actually, like, this is not true. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why journalism is so important, to make sure that we try to get as many facts together as possible, because at the end of the day, it's up to the reader to say, okay, like, I think this or I think that. And for the journalist, the best way to dignify everyone in this situation is to try to just make sure you're getting your facts straight and being able to report this information in a way that doesn't traumatize anyone, while also trying to get the story, and trying to be fair and accurate. And I feel really strongly about that as somebody who has interviewed sexual assault survivors. And, I pride myself on saying, like, at any point that you need to stop, we can stop. Like, I make sure that they know the consent is ongoing, even in a journalistic interview.
That's awesome. I like how you said that, Amanda. That's a really cool. I wish back when I was doing all the interviews that people said that. I was, being in my situation, Amanda, I don't know if you can imagine, but, you were even born after I was on the cover of Time. And journalism was a lot different when I was being interviewed by the Washington Post and the New York Times and Chicago Tribune. And so it was more attack mode and and also pick me apart as best they could and get me to say something that was quotably either unintelligible or I won't say unintelligible, just, might go back. I had to be completely consistent every single time. And it was really hard, but I'm really happy to hear the evolution of journalism underneath the umbrella of Amanda, at least. And the question now I have is we were talking about, 2006 is when the Duke case happened, I believe. And now it's, we're almost 2 decades later. And I think one thing that's sad and really interesting about that one is that she's like, I just wanted someone to believe me. I just wanted support. And how crazy is it that a survivor or a person would think I can get support by coming forward in this way? Because so often it's humiliating and no support. And my experience was parents didn't support me. My 2,000 students at my college signed a petition against me. It was the exact opposite of thinking that I might even get support by accusing a powerful guy at my college. So I think that's interesting about, maybe it's where the world is now a little more, even over the last 20 years, maybe the media can provide at least a platform that might enable someone whose voice would be silenced to be heard in some way. But anyway, I think we've had all kinds of reporters also on the show and different. And here's a cool one. I'd love your thoughts on this because you've expressed this so far. You said, I'll interview any party involved, including the accused, or even the rapist if they've been found as such. And Anthony Edwards was on the podcast. He's a male survivor and actor. And I asked him if he could play a rapist in a movie, flip it upside down. And he was as clear as you are kind of in how you're talking. And he said, yep, I could do that. And so I think it takes a special person in many ways to be able to be as embracing of all the perspectives of life, including those that, have been harmful to others. So that's cool. So then what happens doing all this work? Do you get jobs? I know you've done, news reporting, but also kind of women's outlets. And is there a difference, or did you get to choose, or you applied? How does that happen?
Yeah, so I would say for my journalism career, my jobs have all been staff jobs. So staff jobs are incredibly rare now in journalism. It used to be that you start out at for example, the Jersey Journal, right? It's a local tabloid newspaper. It serves pretty much one county in New Jersey. So if people are familiar with Hoboken, Jersey City, kind of those towns that are right outside New York City, suburban, a little bit more urban, and you would start there. You would do reporting for a couple of years, and then maybe you go up to the next newspaper, a mid-sized newspaper. Then you go from the mid-sized newspaper to the Star Ledger. That's the one that Tony Soprano gets on his, on his driveway every day.
Yep.
And you're there for a long time, and then maybe eventually you go to a Politico, a New York Times, the Daily News, maybe a national outlet. A lot of those newspapers are no longer existing anymore. So your first job is not at the local newspaper in town. You might be doing, more of a startup, or you might be at a trade publication, which is how I started. I was in an internship program. They hired me a couple of months into my internship to be on staff full time. I was there for almost 2 years, and I was covering employee benefits. So how does health insurance work? And I'm 23 years old. I'm still on my dad's health insurance. How, what kinds of sexual harassment policies are in place? And I had graduated college in May 2016. And so this is kind of around the time that Me Too became a thing. So I'm kind of like graduating and entering the workforce when people are now really aware of sexual harassment, like what is okay to say in the workplace, what isn't. I went to go see Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor speak in Brooklyn when they released their book, and how they talked about how they reported on Harvey Weinstein. I have Ronan Farrow's book, and Katie, what you said when you were talking about being questioned by press, in Ronan Farrow's book, he talks about how he almost like quote unquote prosecuted his sources. Like he was doing all of that like lawyerly questioning to make sure that these stories held up as a journalist, because you're trying to make sure that your reporting is rock solid on somebody, you know, like Harvey Weinstein, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood at the time. And so entering journalism at the time when, you know, all of this reporting's coming out and people are actually taking it seriously. And the way I thought about journalism in that sense is I think we've come a long way from, you know, the fact that Harvey Weinstein is kind of like, quote unquote, like the worst of the worst, right? Like he's this big, powerful man. The things he asked for were like very specific. There was a clear pattern. There was all these women who came forward. There was enough documentation to back this up. And you could see very easily, like on the spectrum, like this is a bad man. And what I think is so interesting is since the Me Too movement, that scale has kind of slid. We've been able to look at the nuance of sexual harassment, sexual misconduct. And I think journalists have done a better job, honestly, of reporting on it. And so just that's a little, I'm happy to loop back around, but just that was kind of the context of me entering the workforce. And so I was at the trade publication for 2 years before I got hired at Politico. So I was the New York City healthcare reporter at Politico. And you know, I, again, am super passionate about women's health. And a lot of times, one of the biggest threats to women's health is men and sexual violence. And so that became a subbeat that I carved out. And it came pretty naturally. Like I mentioned, when I was interviewing Marissa Hochstetter, you know, I was covering like a routine city council hearing, and she's trying to push this law forward. And so I was able to develop a relationship with her. So by the time she filed her lawsuit, I was able to get on the phone with her and talk to her. And at least she knew it was a friendly face. I hope that my reporting was unbiased and fair. But, you know, being able to know that like, okay, like I've met this person before. This is not just a random stranger who's calling my phone. And I'm sure when you were going through that experience, your phone was probably blowing up with reporters from all over the world wanting to talk to you.
Yeah, good point, though. It's, you know, luck of the timing and the relationship building. I'm sure you're outstanding at getting people to talk about things that they're maybe embarrassed or reluctant to talk about. How does that feel when you create a bond with someone where they're able to talk about something really private with you?
Yeah, I try to be judgment free because at the end of the day, the press's job is not to have judgment. It is the press's job to have judgment in the critical thinking skills of what is newsworthy. Why does this matter for, you know, our readers to think about? So at Politico, I was writing for an audience of healthcare professionals and politicians. And so another example I have is Scott Stringer. He was the city comptroller. He was running for mayor against Eric Adams in 2021, and he was accused of sexual misconduct by this one woman who had worked with him, I believe, in 2001. And I had covered Scott pretty extensively. He was, a politician who had a lot of healthcare proposals. He was a prominent figure in New York City politics. We're both Jets fans, so it was something that we bonded over. And, you know, I have the due diligence of like, I need to report on him fairly, just as I would on the woman who's accusing him. And so I spoke with the lawyer for the woman who was accused. You know, Scott had a press conference. I got to ask him questions. And I believe that we reported on the issue fairly and accurately. And I have opinions, obviously, right? Like we all have opinions, but that's not my job is not to give my opinion. My job is to present the facts as I have them. And let the reader come to their own conclusion. And, you know, it's for something like that, it's difficult because 2001, to your point earlier, the landscape is so different of what we consider sexual misconduct, sexual assault, how we talk about it is different. And I recognize that like my language as I'm 31 now is going to be different than how my 19-year-olds in college are talking about sexual misconduct versus my parents' generation of what they consider sexual misconduct. And so I think it's really important for journalism to be a place where we can all have those conversations, and it can be presented in a way that people can read about it and try to understand as much as possible. And be open to that. Because I think if you're coming in with judgment already, you're going to close more minds off than open them.
Hi, everybody. It's Katie Koestner. Just a quick interruption. We want you to know that there is an entire shop full of cool merch on the Take Back the Night website to support your own healing journey, that of someone you care about. There are t-shirts, there's bracelets, there's glow-in-the-dark stuff. There's all kinds of unique special edition from our artist series as well. So please take a look. If it's a holiday or a special occasion or just a gift to yourself, support Take Back the Night through your purchase. Hey, Amanda, you're amazing. This is such a good interview. But I'm always like thinking and kind of, here's my next question. I think what you're saying is really fair, but I'm worried that, like, how would you explain to any of our listeners listening to you that what you're doing feels fair to them, right? Because I think it's you. We have to understand, and even I'll just back up one more moment. I believe USA Today. I don't know when this one will air, but they had an article out this past week, and it said, cold cases of rape that they finally processed the rape kit, and it could be 10. There's the example I think was Duluth, Minnesota, 10 years later. And he was guilty, but the judge, a female judge, mind you, she was like, well, you haven't done anything bad for 10 years and no other victims are complaining about you. And you're clearly not a serial rapist and you've done many good things. Like he testified and said, look at all these great things I've been doing. And I wouldn't have done them if you'd put me in jail for the requisite number of years. So she gave him a 1-year sentence instead of what he should have had, because it was 10 years cold case and he was on best behavior. So that's a whole different issue too, but it could be in part, all these issues are really complicated, but I just think it's, as the reporter, what's interesting is you are separated from the judge and jury process, and yet you're giving the insider look almost into the courtroom with all the information you garner. So the public opinion becomes the judge and jury without like the full process of defense and going back and forth. You're kind of like doing the prosecution and the defense all at once with your writing, if you will.
No, and I totally hear you on that. And, to answer your first question, obviously
I had one, but good for tracking with me, Amanda.
No, I totally get what you're saying. And for listeners who have been sexually abused, sexually assaulted, anything that's happened to them, obviously it's not their fault, right? Like we could say that unequivocally. It is not your fault if you've been sexually assaulted. Right. The point of explaining the journalism part, right, is I think it's helpful.
I'll just restate it now for the sake of our listeners. What I'm really interested in hearing from Amanda and for all of us listening is, like, how can we now read perhaps even our own stories, like I had to do in print, and be satisfied that the reporter is neutral. And I will speak for Amanda only, because I'm not so sure back then. Like, here's one like quick snippet in case anyone wants to see the evolution of journalism. I mean, all the ones about me, you can go find them. I mean, there are historic records back from the 1990, 91. But you can even see, like, even Time magazine on my cover, on the inside, like, section, it polled the country, Amanda, back then about, to your point, like, people think about the issue differently and define the terms differently. So the one query was, if a man pays for dinner, it was always heteronormative. If he pays for dinner, should he expect sex? And more than half the country back then said yes on a date. So, like, times change, right? But I'm just saying, like, even the reporting that was done was very different. And I'll tell you one last story. When I was giving a speech, the Philadelphia Inquirer, I was speaking, I think at Penn, downtown in Philly, and the Inquirer sent the reporter, but their photographer belly crawled down the center of the two sections of the audience, like the middle. There was a aisle. He belly crawled with his camera to get exactly the right angle of me being my most tearful. Just to kind of, I was very exploitative, like sensational, like I'll get you at your most vulnerable in every way. So I felt back then it was Shark Tank for me. But
No, that sounds really difficult, and I'm sorry you had to go through that.
I kind of want our listeners to know, like, I'm so happy they get to hear you. Because you're painting a really different picture, which is why I'll reiterate now the question, since I gave a little more depth and perception to like reporting as the subject myself, and being treated a certain way by not just the reporters, but even the photographers. And even the Time magazine, hey, you all, like, I don't look like that. I mean, I kind of did, but they kept my hair in shadow, blah, blah, blah. It was like it was an art form and a message they wanted to send. And I semi-fit the bill, or could be molded into it without even AI, without even like no Photoshop, nothing. It was like so old school. But what I'm thinking is, like, tell our listeners now, like, what they should be asking reporters for. Like, some of them might get interviewed or be part. So what should they empower them, Amanda?
Great. No, and I think journalism is a reflection of our time, right? Like, when we think about like the early 2000s of how like Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan and Britney Spears were treated, we're kind of seeing a little bit of that with the pop stars now. But the way media has always treated women, I think is generally pretty poorly, right? And I think the thing to remember about journalism is that it's not advocacy, or it's not always advocacy. Sometimes there are newspapers that are, advocating for one thing or the other. And I think that for survivors who are like, my story is so important, and like you, Katie, saying, I want to stand up and help change the narrative, like your experience and your sharing what happened to you has changed for my generation, right? Like, how we talk about consent, how I can go on a date with somebody, not feel it, and say, great, it was so nice to meet you, and not be expected to have to reciprocate in any way other than showing up and being authentically myself on that date. And to me, like, that's beautiful and that's progress. And it's unfortunate that it comes on the backs of other women. And also like other people, right? Not just women, even though women are primarily the ones who are sexually assaulted, men and non-binary people are as well. But I think kind of going in with that framework of just like understanding how journalism works, I think is the best way to protect yourself. I always recommend like record your interviews with people. I'm recording as a journalist, my interviews. It doesn't hurt to have your own recording. Being able to think clearly about kind of like what would a journalist need to understand about what happened in order to be clear. A lot of times, it's an emotional topic. You get emotional talking about it. Being able to say like, here are photos, or here's a family member or a friend who's going to provide information to you if it's too triggering. You almost want to like help the journalist prove your case, right? Is the way I would think about it from the survivor perspective. On the journalist side, we're looking for any information that's going to, paint a story based on the facts available. So, you had mentioned rape kits. We know in New York City, I know especially, but I'm sure across the country, there's a huge backlog. Police departments are overwhelmed. They're not testing rape kits. And so being able to provide any sort of evidence or information to a journalist, it makes a journalist's life easier and might be able to kind of close the chasm between what the survivor thinks they're going to be getting out of a story and what the reporter is like, ethically obliged to report on or talk about.
Yeah, it's perfectly. Oh my gosh, that's such good advice. I'm even thinking too, Amanda, not just recording it, but isn't it fair that they could ask for a list of questions ahead of time so they can prepare?
Yeah, so a lot of reporters generally don't share their questions in advance, especially with, I talk about this in journalism class, when you have like the mayor of New York City, right? Or you have somebody who is quote unquote media trained. They they know the rules of journalism. And if they're asking for questions ahead of time, they know they're not supposed to be doing that. But I think the point of having empathetic journalists, right, is understanding what consent, is there informed consent? So for example, I would interview people who are homeless whenever the city announced a new homeless policy. I needed to make sure that the person who I'm talking to understands I write for a newspaper, that what they tell me is going to be put in print. If I felt like I couldn't get informed consent from those individuals, I would not talk to them. I would give them my business card. I really took every effort I could to make sure that the person who I was speaking to understood that they were talking to a journalist. I think that can similarly be applied to sexual assault survivors in the way that I would say, hey, listen, like, here are the topics we're going to talk about. This is how I'm going to these are the types of questions I'm going to ask, so you're prepared. But reporters generally don't share, like, I'm going to ask this question and this question and this question. So I think kind of like understanding those things about journalism, understanding that the more evidence you can provide to back up your claim, the better. And that the reporter's coming in from like a very unemotional point of view, that they're trying to look at all the facts as possible. And I understand that's probably difficult for a survivor who's like, this happened to me, this is my story, and it is very like emotionally triggering to talk about. And I don't want to negate that, but I also want people to feel empowered to understand like what that process actually looks like. So that way they don't feel blindsided once a story comes out and maybe they didn't convey what they wanted to.
Yeah, perfect. Oh my goodness. Maybe they should call you first and you can have a side gig, Amanda. It could be like a media consultant for interviews for survivors. Well, let's talk. So how long, so you're also a professor and you also just wrote a book. So tell us about those parts of your life.
Yeah. So, I was working on a novel during lockdown. So I was reporting from New York City during the height of COVID. I was at Governor Cuomo's press briefings. I was talking to doctors for 18 hours a day, ICU nurses, people that ran the morgues at the hospital. And so it was a really dark time. And so usually an hour before bed, I would sit, at my desk or on my couch and I would write Sex and the City fanfic, but like made modern for 23-year-olds. And that was kind of how I got through that worst point of time. But during lockdown, I received like the government stipend, like a lot of people did. And I used that to actually pay for a writing class. And so I took a 12-week writing class and I was workshopping that book. And I was really like working hard. I really wanted to have a book to show for my miserable time during COVID and be like, see, it was worth it. Like I have this thing that came out of it. And about like a year later, so it's like November 2021, I'm sitting on my couch and I start hearing voices in my head. And normally when this happens, I'll like pull out my phone or my laptop to write down what they're saying and they usually get quiet. So this time they were not quiet. They got louder and it was this friend group who was fighting. So I sat down and wrote, and I can only describe it as I went into a trance and I kind of like gained consciousness at like 2:00 in the morning and I had about 6,000 words written down. And I was like, wow, like there's something here. And so I sat on it for a little bit and then slowly came back and started writing this novel. And it took me about, I would say 3 years in total, but it's coming out in April and it's called People Are Talking. And the novel is about these two best friends, Mal and Danny. They were in a secret vigilante society at their college campus that evolved into like the secret organization that tracks rapists. And something bad happens on their college campus that causes their friend group to explode. And nobody's talked to each other. And then about 10 years later, they all reconvene at their friend's wedding. So they go down to Austin, Texas for a long weekend. Everyone is blackmailing each other. People are hooking up with each other. And then the secret society crashes the wedding with deadly consequences. So that's the book. And I wanted it to be kind of Veronica Mars coded where, there's a lot of humor, but it's dark. There's an underbelly of sexual assault. And I was really interested because obviously, like I mentioned, with the Me Too era, there's been so much content. There's so many novels and movies and TV shows about sexual assault and what it's like from the survivor perspective. And I've read some other great books that like focus on, the assailant or these bad men. And I was really interested in what happens to a friend group when sexual assault occurs, and how I felt like the men generally ignore it or don't want to talk about it or try to avoid it, but maybe they're having private conversations, versus the women are kind of forced to pick a side. And it's almost like women understand sexual assault because a lot, I would say maybe most women have experienced unwanted sexual attention, touching, assault in their lifetime. And so it feels more personal, I think, to us. And I also was looking up statistics to prepare for this, and I saw that I believe 61% of bisexual women have reported being assaulted in their lifetime, compared to 35% of straight women. And so one of my main characters is bisexual. And so I was thinking about, her fictional experiences, but reflecting the experiences of like me and my college friends when we were in college, and how that has like a trickle down effect on how we operate and go through the world. And so that's kind of what I wanted out of this novel, was to entertain you, to have fun, to have some jokes, but also to kind of deal with, obviously this is a tough topic to handle. And I didn't want to focus on assault in and of itself. Like, did it happen? Did it not happen? I'm more interested in kind of the human impact that it has on the friend group.
Amanda, I really, also I wanted to first say I love the friend group idea, and I think you're right on with how men and women treat it so differently. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for continuing to take the journey on the Dear Survivor podcast. A quick note, we are 100% volunteer at the podcast and at Take Back the Night. Your donations, your generosity helps us do what we do on such a shoestring budget. And we would be so grateful if this show is helping you through your journey and you are passing it along to others you care about. Please visit the Take Back the Night website and donate and support our cause and our mission to end sexual violence and support survivors. Thank you. I was talking to a woman, a complicated situation that's going on right now at an Ivy League college. It's the men's sports team and the women's counterpart. And the woman got raped by one of the male team members, who was her best friend. So the male team, I have a little bit of insight because the victims has like friends on both sides, right? So the girls right now, the female team is moving away from supporting the victim. They've all they're like, this is too much trauma and too much baggage. We can't, we're already maxed with like trying to be D1 athletes. And we don't want to deal with supporting this team member. She's not the MVP. So they've all kind of been like, go away, you baggage woman. And the men are like just treating it like as business as usual. And nobody's fussing. Nobody's like, oh, you're a blank. Like they're just being like, play the darn game, win some more goals. Like I think it is really telling. And I think it will provoke a lot of conversation. And then the only other thing I'll tell you, that's current tense. That was like yesterday for me.
I'm sorry to hear that about that woman.
Let's think about, like, for me, my daily life is usually people find me because it's me. Like it's a ridiculous question. What do you do for a living? Like when you're on the cover of Time magazine, it's got to be related. Like no one's going to not know who you are. But I mean, I don't announce it like I'm wearing a scarlet letter, but people ask, and I'm not going to like make up and say I'm a goat farmer. Right. So anyway, people tell me stuff, but I was also going to say my own situation, he was in a fraternity. Actually, he was not in a fraternity when it happened, but he got first bid after he was found guilty from the most prestigious fraternity at my college. So they were like, come on, be a bro. Like, yes, you got away with this and got a slap. And my all-female residence hall, Amanda, my my roommate was dating was one of his best friends, and she was like, I moved rooms, like I had to leave. So I'm the one who left the building.
And
Um,
that happens
yeah,
quite a lot where it's, somebody who's a survivor is often the one who's castrated from society, right? Like that still happens even now, right? And that
yeah,
was something I wanted to explore in this is I think most women, when asked about, sexual assault, and I would say especially like more liberal women, right? They'd be like, of course I'm a feminist, like I believe women. And then when something happens where it's like, it's your brother, it's your best friend, it's it's a man in your life who you love and trust. I think there is that kind of questioning of like, yes, I agree with this on principle, but now it affects me personally. And that changes the dynamic. And so I really wanted my two main characters to really experience that because it was something I
I
hadn't
love
really
it.
seen too much in
No, I
fiction.
like it. I like it, and it could be a movie now, right? Are you going to shop it out?
I have some meetings scheduled.
All right.
That's all I can say.
You go. I mean, so that's perfect. I mean, I totally think that's like where it's also really important to um, think about it. And maybe, I'll just say one more thing because we're having such a good time talking. I think when I do presentations to Amanda, I actually talk about how men and women interact differently. And I was probably like, I think one good thing about me was I wasn't a girl. Like I played chess when there was no other girls in sixth grade playing chess. Like I didn't care, and I couldn't do cartwheels, and I sing like a frog. Like I kind of look blonde and cute, but I'm not like anywhere close to like girly girl. I think I had some Barbies, of course, but I would just say like I wasn't someone who, as a female, where I worked on objective success rather than emotional connection. So I'm really wired differently. So I would say to our listeners, like, think about how you're wired and what you need as an individual, and because your needs become your Achilles heels if they are things that can't be fulfilled based on your life narrative and who you surround yourself with. So, I don't know that we can actually change how we're wired to need affection or, the love languages. Maybe we're born with love languages, or emotional connections. And so I would just say, like, thinking about what you're talking about, Amanda, in the book, I think it's also important to think with our listeners. Hopefully they'll read the book when it comes out, and then also think about where they fit in that storyline, and where others in their space, they, how their family members or sisters or, aunts or cousins or other members of their sports or sorority or church or whatever they're in, like how, that interpersonal connection and validation, and where does validation need to come from ultimately as a survivor? Is it having your story told by Amanda in a newspaper? Is it being written about as a book? Is it just telling a counselor? Like, I think one of the themes I'm getting from today is, how do we tell a story, and how do we honor all the parts of the story and still come out feeling heard? And I think what's magical about what you said today is that you're allowing a lot of people to feel heard, even if, they're on the other side, the perpetration side, or they like, I don't want to get involved side, or this makes me uncomfortable side. But I think you're giving the space for all of those people to have a voice. And I also like that I'm thinking about how much that dialogue and those monologues are changing over 3 decades. Like, it is changing.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to use that, Katie. Thank you.
Okay, let's
But
quote
no,
me.
I
I,
think it's so true though, because it's like, if we don't understand how other people think and how they react, how are we supposed to have those dialogues? I was thinking a lot about restorative justice, and
mm,
kind of like, who has the bandwidth to give that restorative justice, right? So like, if I know a man who, has been accused of sexual assault, I am not the person if it was me that he assaulted or my sister, right? But if I don't know the woman, but I know the man, and I'm able to engage with him and continue talking with him, I think that matters, right? Like, because otherwise, what do you do with all these men who have been accused of sexual assault? Like, are they cast off into society? Do they have no friends? Are they turning to the internet and reading, things that might make them more extreme? Or are people in their lives engaging with them? And I think that different people have different bandwidths based on everyone's different experiences. And
I interrupted, but I really like going back to what you said about restorative justice and restorative practices. I do know rape has the highest recidivism rate of any crime, and it's really hard to. I actually, Amanda, one time I showed up at a college in Texas, and the back 4 rows of my audience were all convicted rapists they had brought from the local prison. They're like, "Oh, by the way, Katie,
wow.
You'll be helping with our restorative practices program." I'm like, "Oh, thanks for the notice."
Did you consent to that beforehand?
No. They're like, This is how things rolled for me in life, Amanda. Like, I've been through a zillion, million crazy possible things, and I love it. Like, I think I was built for it. Like, there's not much that you can't throw at me that I'm not like, bring it on. The harder, the better. Like, give me something no one's ever done. I want to try it. Like, and even if you piss me off, I'll do it better. Like,
you're so impressive. I love that. But that's so a little spooky.
No. It's like so good. And it's so good when we challenge. And I guess I love that you thought really long and hard about what's not been written, and you wrote something. And you better write.
And I hope it opens up a conversation, right? Like that.
Again, Amanda, if you want to, well, we've got to wrap up, but I know I have another interview soon, but I just wanted to chat with you for 2 seconds. But my goodness, this is so much excitement for me. I'm like, you're the first reporter I felt like has a new leash on what it means to be a reporter and like vision, and you're doing it really well. Like,
that's so nice of you to say. Thank you.
I know you're doing it well, but I'm worried that the old school, mean school is still what's going to be the one that's heard the most. And we're not yet to the all-encompassing like method that you've described, but at least you're a professor, so you can teach the next generation after you. It takes multiple generations, right? Like, you're going to be,
so true.
I left a legacy, you're going to leave a legacy. And even if you're not the one who gets to, it sounds like though you already had a lot of kick-ass interviews, so I'm not too worried for you.
Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate it. And this was so nice to be able to talk with you about this and go on a deep dive. And I really appreciate you and your listeners. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. Well, they're going to love reading your book. I am too. And I can't wait to see it in the movie theater as well, or on Netflix.
Oh, fingers crossed.
Like where movies are showing. I can already see the cast. It's going to be awesome. Well, anything else you want to close out with today, Amanda?
No, I just want to thank you again for your time. I know it's really difficult to, talk about sexual assault, especially in like fiction when it's supposed to be, sweeping you into a new world and distracting you. But my goal for this book really was to be entertaining while also, opening up conversation of how we talk about sexual assault and how friends, are addressing it, because this is obviously a very real thing that happens on college campuses every day. And has lifelong effects.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Amanda. And for all of our listeners, continue on this journey. It is a wild and bumpy ride, but it is full of surprises with daisies along the side of the road, and just pull over and smell a few and then get back in the car and keep going along for our ride, because I think there's so many ways to heal, and there's so many voices that we haven't ever heard about. Like today, Amanda, I met a new amazing person in my world, and I hope our listeners will pick up that book and read on. And remember, listeners, there's a whole host of resources for healing. If you are ready to, you could call Amanda probably for an interview. But also just don't forget, there's the legal support hotline on our website. If you're ready to seek justice, that's another way to have your story heard, and heard by a jury of peers or heard in a court of law. And maybe things will there'll be some accountability, and then restorative justice can happen. So wonderful. Again, take good care. And until the next episode, continue on one day at a time. Thank you again, everybody, for joining another episode of the Dear Katie podcast. I hope very much you found today's episode helpful, empowering, and a way to take another step in that long journey toward healing and supporting those we care about, learning about sexual violence prevention, and also survivor support. For those of you who don't know, again, the Take Back the Night website has tons of great resources, books, self-care options, cool merch. If you're feeling like you need a wearable, we have great t-shirts. Of course, we would love it if you follow along on our free newsletter with news and events going on around the country and even around the globe. And finally, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find our entire community popping up here and there, and recaps of our podcast episodes as well. So together we shatter the silence, and together we end the violence. Take care.